Welcome to CSU's Powerhouse Energy Campus. This is a place that we build to change how the world does energy, to have an impact on our energy and environmental future. If you look around, you see a lot of the physical things that researchers at CSU's Energy Institute work on. Things like hydrogen fuel cells, cook stoves for the developing world, algae biofuels. Outside we have hydraulic hybrid retrofits. We have our science fair winner with her microbial fuel cell. But as much as our energy solutions depend on things, on science and engineering, they really depend on people and the way people approach the energy problem. So at Powerhouse here, we have a lot of great science and engineering going on, but sitting beside the scientists are the policymakers. People, Governor Ritter's Center for the New Energy Economy is here in the building. We've got faculty members in psychology and sociology working in behavioral aspects of energy. We've got people working on health impacts of energy. So the idea, this is this grand social experiment to get people who are interested in large-scale solutions to our energy problems in the same place with the same focus. So we're really excited to be hosting the Spark event tonight, and we've got a lot of great speakers tonight. So, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you for coming out.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks. All right, hey everyone. So my name is Dan Boyce. I'm a reporter with Inside Energy. It's this public media project that you're going to hear a bunch about later. But this evening, we're going to be talking about the most important issue of our time, and one where Colorado is on the cutting edge of innovation. It's one of the reasons I applied for my job, to cover the future of energy unfolding right here. And one of the first things I found out when taking on the energy beat as a reporter is how monumentally wonky everything about this industry is, and how you can think you completely understand something and you'll be completely wrong.
Some sunny news now. The cost of solar panels is falling rapidly. A 60%.
Now, does anybody out here, does anybody recognize that voice? You get a prize if you recognize that voice and shout it out. Anyone? Well, I think I heard it from over here. That's right. Okay, this water bottle is yours.
Oh, he's gone.
I don't know, you can come and pick it up, I guess. Right, that's David Green from NPR's Morning Edition. He was actually reading an introduction of one of my stories on Morning Edition. But it actually was pretty much the opposite of the story I thought I was going to be doing for Morning Edition, and that's what I'm going to tell you about. So it was shortly after I started my job, and I was kind of desperate, looking for some cool, unique, new energy story angle. And I went and saw this energy forum, and I saw the mayor of tiny Del Norte, Colorado, speak there. And I promise Del Norte is not a maximum security penitentiary like that photo makes it seem. It's just it's the best photo. It doesn't matter. Anyway, this man, Marty Asplin, he explained how his town, and essentially the entire San Luis Valley, is served by one major power line. A power line which enters the valley through mountains covered in orange, beetle-killed trees. This is a forest just waiting to burn. You can see here the aftermath of the West Fork Fire Complex fires which ravaged the area a couple of years ago. Now, if there was a devastating wildfire that went through and knocked out that major power line, Del Norte would be out of luck as far as their energy needs go. Yet, Mayor Asplin explains how his town is prepared for such an event with these solar panels. You can see that was where I got that earlier picture. Solar panels powering the town's water supply, the town hall, the police station. Mayor Asplin explained how if there was a major power outage, these solar panels would supply electricity for emergency services for the city. And I'm thinking this is a perfect story idea. Tiny Colorado town protects itself from wildfire with solar panels. NPR is going to love this. They would love it. I pitch it to my editor. She's into it. So cool, I'm off on a 4-hour drive down to Del Norte, microphone in hand. It turns out Mayor Asplund, he was sick. He couldn't meet me. So I'm set up with Del Norte's public works supervisor, this guy, Kevin Larimore. All right, game time, Kevin. Tell me all about your innovative, cutting-edge solar-powered town.
The solar won't power the wells if there's a power failure.
What? Wait, that was the whole concept of my story, though, that if there's a power outage, that the solar panels will supply power.
Yeah, okay. So maybe I was confused here. So I did want to clarify, because when I had spoken
I'm totally
with...
panicking right here. My heart is in my throat. Don't you see? I was told.
If there was a total major power outage, that the solar panels would supply some services for the city.
Yeah, and it's my understanding they won't.
Like, I don't think I can explain what I felt like at that moment, but my story was completely shot to pieces, right? Colorado is supposed to be on the cutting edge of energy innovation. I've driven all the way down here on the company dime. I just sold my editor on this super cool story idea that she's expecting. It's almost like I'm a general contractor. I show up on the job site. I've got all my gear in hand, all my supplies, and then somebody says, you know how we were going to build a log cabin? Turns out we want a glass tower. You can have that ready on Monday, right? Okay, this is hilarious. I bantered back and forth with Jordan about how horrible of an analogy that was. But anyway, you can understand. But anyway, you can get that I'm screwed, right? That makes sense. Right? Wrong, though. Because necessity is the mother of innovation. Take it away, Mr. Green.
A lot more solar is popping up on rooftops around the country. All this comes as the United States is trying to find better ways to protect our power system from blackouts. But as Dan Boyce from member station KUNC reports, more solar does not really mean fewer blackouts, at least not yet.
I don't know if you were able to catch that. But that story about this fireproof solar town that I was working on ended up being something completely different. It ended up being a story about why do the solar panels in this fire vulnerable town not work in a blackout. And I'm going to show you my favorite part here, which is my favorite part because it makes it seem as if this is how I had it planned the whole time.
Great! Since they're generating all this power, Del Norte's ready for a wildfire, right? Well,
If there's a wildfire that knocks out the power infrastructure, these solar panels won't power the town.
No, to my understanding they won't.
weird as it sounds, Del Norte's solar panels are actually dependent on the power grid.
Yeah. So that actually ended up being a pretty cool story. And even a better story than I think I initially thought. But I got lucky there because the point is that energy is this really, really complicated thing. And so if the mayor of a town with solar panels right outside his town hall and a reporter whose job it is to cover the energy industry, if those two people could so completely misunderstand the fundamental workings of that technology, what does that mean for your average Coloradans who do not deal with this industry day in and day out, but whose lives, like all of ours, are inexorably tied to it? Because those innovations, like what I thought was happening in Del Norte, those actually are happening in Colorado. And it's important we talk about those and do it in a way that mayors and reporters and the rest of us can understand and appreciate. So that's what we're going to talk about this evening in the sessions here moving forward. And I'm going to be with you here and on throughout the rest of the evening and joined as well with my colleague, Jordan Werfsbrock.
Those stairs are seriously a hazard here. Right, so I'm Jordan Werfsbrock. I'm Inside Energy's data journalist and resident doodler of pickles holding up signs. And next, I'd actually like to introduce someone who's going to talk about, that beetle kill wood that Dan mentioned, the kind that's surrounding the town of Del Norte and putting it at risk for wildfire. He's going to talk about how that wood isn't just a hazard, but it's actually a valuable energy resource. And so I'd like to welcome up John Field. He's a PhD candidate who's just on the cusp of being a doctor. And when he's not spending his time saving the world through beetle kill wood, he likes to backcountry ski. So welcome, John.
All right.
Take it away. And
you.
great work on not tripping on those stairs. You're already off to a better start.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. So yeah, beetle kill trees. That's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about this in the context of a new project called the BANR project that's led here out of CSU. And to start us off, I have this nice mountain scene here. This is the East Inlet Trail. This is just outside of Grand Lake, on the west side of Rocky Mountain National Park. And this is a place where, when I first moved to Colorado in 2005, I spent a lot of time hiking and recreating and just enjoying the outdoors. And I remember at the time, people were just starting to talk about the mountain pine beetle and about how it had caused so much damage and disruption in the forests in Canada and British Columbia, and how it was finally making its way down to Colorado and causing problems there. And at the time, I didn't really understand the significance of all this. This is that same area, a satellite image, 2005. By 2011, just 6 years later, it's a completely different scene. So at this point, there's something like 40 million acres of forest across Colorado and the northern Rockies that have been affected by the mountain pine beetle. This is a native species. It's always been in our forests, but the current level of infestation is unprecedented. And it's a combination of the way the forest has been managed, clear cuts about a century ago, and then increasingly high levels of fire suppression since then. A combination of the management, then also the climate. So we've had a lot of dry summers that make the trees vulnerable to beetles, and a lot of warm winters, which are better for the beetles. So this has been a challenge all across the West in terms of how do we manage these forests? Can we salvage some value out of all this destruction and disruption? And so about 2 years ago, a company approached our group with the concept on how you might get some use out of this material. And the company was called Cool Planet Energy Systems. They were based out of Southern California, but are now located in Denver, Colorado. And they make biofuels. It's not a traditional biofuel production process where you're taking a food feedstock like corn and fermenting it into alcohol. Rather, it's a thermochemical conversion process where you're taking any kind of biomass, including woody biomass, and you're heating it up really, really fast in a controlled environment, and you're splitting it apart into a gas phase and a liquid phase and a solid phase. Now, what Cool Planet does with the liquid phase is use catalysts and upgrading the material into a drop-in fuel that's a lot like gasoline that avoids a lot of the issues associated with ethanol. What they get out from the solid fraction is a material known as biochar, and it's a charcoal-like material that potentially has a lot of value in agricultural systems as a soil amendment. And their big idea here is if you have a lot of beetle kill trees, trees that fixed a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere while they were growing before they died, and that would otherwise degrade and return that CO2 back to the atmosphere or burn up in a forest fire. The idea is to take that material, run it through their modular thermochemical conversion process, make some green fuels that are going to displace some fossil fuel use, and then also lock up some of that carbon in the form of biochar, where it's going to be sequestered in the ground for potentially very long amounts of time. And so the question for us is, does this concept make sense for our forest? What would we have to know to understand in order to consider ever doing this in Colorado, in Grand Lake? So questions like how much material is out there and where is it located? Is it recoverable? Can you get this material out of the forest to a conversion point with a reasonable economic return? In what cases might that removal support land management goals, where you're already trying to get material off the landscape to reduce the amount of fuel on the landscape, or for habitat preservation, things like that? And under what conditions would this actually have a positive climate impact? And as a result of these conversations, we put together a proposal that was funded by the US Department of Agriculture and created the Bioenergy Alliance Network of the Rockies, or the BANR project. And this is a 5-year, $10 million project to study this question and to lay the science-based underpinnings for a potential project like this. And so we have partners, all the major universities across Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and here in Colorado. We're partnered with the U.S. Forest Service. And we have teams that are looking at quantifying the supply of this material on the landscape, looking into the logistics of harvesting that material and getting it to a point where it could be converted. We have a very large team looking at system sustainability from an economic perspective, an environmental perspective, and also a social perspective. And then finally, we have a very large team devoted to education, extension, and outreach to make sure that we're engaging with our stakeholders, we're hearing their concerns, and then we're disseminating our research results out to the broader public. Just a few quick examples of what this looks like. In order to quantify the amount of feedstock that's out on the landscape right now, you have to go in and do a lot of sampling on the ground. So this is an area where our team members have been working in the Colorado State Forest State Park up by Cameron Pass. And they've been going up there and felling trees. And the idea here is that in order to know how much mass you get when you harvest a tree, you don't want to take every single tree down and weigh it. That's very labor intensive. And so they develop equations and relationships to understand the dimensions of the tree and the mass of a tree from things that are easier to measure, like diameters and heights. So they go in, they do some selective sampling, they build up these equations, and then they use that to understand how they can take remote sensing satellite images and then start to predict how much material there is on the landscape and exactly where it is and how we might get to it. We have another team that's looking at the logistics of harvesting this material. So guys that are going out with stopwatches and following around the different pieces of heavy equipment that are already up there doing salvage logging for timber production. And so they'll go in and follow around each piece of equipment out there and time exactly how long it takes to run through its operations and figure out the optimal way to sequence all this together in order to get to some kind of final product that you might use for fuel production. These guys are also looking at what fractions of the tree you might potentially make fuels out of to figure out if we're competing with the local timber industry or if we're a complement to the local timber industry. We have a lot of biochar research that's going on at CSU. In a variety of different systems, so things like irrigated corn here in Fort Collins, peach production in the western slope, as well as some activities in forests, trying to figure out the potential economic value of this biochar product that our Cool Planet partners are currently producing, and also the stability of this material to figure out if it's a viable strategy for carbon sequestration. And then finally, the part of the project that I'm involved in is doing the greenhouse gas accounting. So basically taking the insights that we're getting from our environmental studies, doing some ecosystem process-based modeling, doing some modeling of the Cool Planet technology, and then putting everything together into a life cycle assessment where we're trying to make a decision support tool where people could go in and zoom in on an area that they were interested in and say, okay, up here near Cameron Pass, I've got this forest stand. How much dead material is there? How expensive might it be to get it off that landscape? And then finally, if you were to do this and harvest this material, what would the overall climate impact of all this be? We've got a variety of activities going right at the moment. We're currently working on producing a feedstock atlas for northern Colorado. That's going to be one of our first products from the project. We're doing a case study to try to understand some of these climate impacts, and we're also doing a variety of educational exercises right now in development of curricular materials. Cool Planet is currently working on their first commercial scale facility in Louisiana, and we're hoping that for the second or the third or the fourth facility, they might consider us here in Colorado in the Northern Rockies. So if any of you want to learn more about our project, we're on the web. We've got a website, we're on Twitter, and we've got a variety of videos on YouTube. And I hope that you'll send us a tweet or an email. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
All right. So before we get going, I think we've got a quick round of our favorite game. You guys aren't tired of it yet, are you? You can tell us if you are, but all right. We've We've got another oil or pickle round, so we need one more brave contestant. You win either way. You'll get something whether you get it right or not.
Yes,
All right,
thank you,
right
that
here.
guy.
Sir, what is your name? John. All right.
All right, man. John,
Drum
oil or pickle?
roll.
Mondo.
Mondo.
It is oil.
Oh, man,
Yes,
you've
you
done
win a
this
prize.
before, haven't you? All right, step up and get your prize. So, all right, thank you for playing.
All right, coming up next, everybody, the greatest boss I've ever had. Inside Energy's executive editor, Elisa Barba.
That was a great introduction. Greatest boss ever. So in the spirit of interactivity, I'm going to throw 4 terms out there. I was asked to share with you kind of an energy watershed moment for me. So I'm not going to tell you where I'm from, but maybe you'll guess. Four terms, and raise your hand. Don't shout it out too early. Deregulation, rolling blackouts, megawatt loading, and FERC. They all refer to an incident a few years ago that kind of made me think about energy really, really differently. Does anybody have an idea? You got it. This woman won. California energy crisis. So I was the Western bureau chief for NPR back in 2000. I know most of my staff wasn't even born then. And California deregulated the electricity system in 1996, which is something no normal person paid attention to. And then it resulted in rolling blackouts and a huge crisis and Enron. And it occurred to me, and it occurred to a lot of other people at the time, that energy and power are for the public good, and they shouldn't be gamed. And so it just made everybody kind of sit back. And I think in the 15 years since then, we've all forgotten about it. I kind of forgot about it until last year when I was asked to come do this job and run this collaboration of journalists covering energy in Wyoming, North Dakota, and Colorado. And what we found, none of us had done this before. Yes, Dan got his job because he said, this is the most important issue of our time. But none of us really understood it. And it's an amazingly complex issue. And our job is to somehow translate that to to everybody else. We talk about turning spinach into donuts. It's not an issue that most of us, I mean, maybe you guys, because you're here at this conference, but most people don't naturally go, oh, this is so interesting. And, truth be told, I still live in California. I don't live in one of these states where there's a lot of mining, a lot of oil and gas. Energy is not the first issue that people are talking about. So when we often joke about, the dinner party issue. We go to a dinner party, people say, what do you do? I say, I cover energy. And they almost invariably say, oh, fracking. That's like the response. So our job, what we found, an amazingly complex issue, but an absolutely fascinating issue, and one that is really at the center of our times. And for our kids, whether it be the buzzwords we all know, climate change or war on coal or fracking, our job and what we're trying very hard to do, and we hope you listen and pay attention, we're trying to translate that into stories that convince you that this is the most compelling issue. So thank you. Thanks for being here.
Okay, there we are. So, all right. So our next guest was Colorado's 41st governor from 2007 through 2011. And during that time, Bill Ritter focused much of his efforts on promoting renewable energy and what he called the new energy economy. During his tenure, he signed 57 energy bills, including an aggressive 30% renewable energy standard. After his 4 years, he became the founder and director of the Center for the New Energy Economy, which is based right here in this building. Please join me in welcoming former Governor Bill Ritter.
Thank you.
All right. So, Governor, I think one of our challenges in this conversation will be not to just roll annoyingly off the stage. But, I wanted to start things off this evening by having you tell us a little bit about and explain the concept of the new energy economy and why you call it that versus, say, something like the green energy economy?
Well, first of all, because we think we were, at the time when we really began talking about it, that we were doing something completely different for the state of Colorado. There was a bit of a pejorative connotation with green. Environmental groups that had tried to shut down development in different places around, particularly the mountains, began to be known as green groups. And we were really trying to understand how to bridge political chasms, how to bridge ideological divides, and try and get Coloradans to a place where they understood you could produce energy domestically. And while we did a lot on renewable energy, we were also trying to understand the role of natural gas, quite frankly, the role of coal, the role of all forms of energy. But you could produce energy domestically. You could do it in a way where there was an economic benefit to it. We really believed as well that you could address environmental concerns if you paid attention to it. And then finally, that you could do it in a way where you provided equity for ratepayers. Now, you'll notice those are 4 E's. And we began, even in the campaign before I became governor, talking about the new energy economy with this mnemonic device that was about energy, environment, economic development, and equity. And there are a lot of people saying you can't have it all. You can't get all of those things at the same place. And we actually used a value lens when we looked at energy legislation. We used that value lens to say, does it do those things? So when we put in place a 30% renewable energy standard, we knew that would have tremendous environmental benefits, but we also believed we could do economic development. We could create jobs as a part of that. And so my director of the Governor's Energy Office, who now works with me at the center, Tom Plant, and he's here, Tom and our economic development director traveled together. And they worked in tandem to do energy work, but also to do to do economic development. And then we put rate caps in place to protect ratepayers. And we wound up several years later being able to say that value lens worked. And so that's the new energy economy, was to think about it in terms of addressing multiple challenges at the same time.
Now, so and a lot of what you do in your work is looking at the state level. If we look at the federal level and with Congress and we talk about significant energy policy, a lot of times we're talking about nothing as far as political gridlock and stalemates. But where there is that inaction on the federal side, there's this vacuum created that you're saying that the states are filling in some respect.
Yeah, that was the premise in part for coming to CSU and working with states, is that things were so shut down federally. There's a book that these 2 authors have written. One's a conservative and one's a progressive, and it's called It's Even Worse Than It Looks. And it's about the United States Congress. I've now testified twice in the last few years in front of the Senate Committee for Environment and Public Works, and I'm writing the sequel that's called It's Even Worse Than It's Even Worse Than It Looks. I mean, there is nothing happening at a comprehensive way in the United States Congress, and it's really a sad fact. The rest of the world actually looks at the Congress and believes all of America's shut down. And yet we have 220 million Americans who live in a state with a renewable energy standard, about 240 million Americans who live in a state with an energy efficiency resource standard. We work on energy policy at the state level, and actually we started tracking legislation that is introduced at the state level. 2 years ago, 4,500 bills were introduced at the state level around the 50 states. 600 of them became law. Republican and Democratic governors alike are actually working on trying to understand how to advance the clean energy agenda. They may be doing it for different reasons. Some may believe more about climate change and others in the economic opportunity. But you look at governors in Nevada, Michigan, the governors, the governor in Georgia actually signed legislation concerning solar. Governor Perry in Texas, a very conservative Republican, signed legislation on what's called demand-side management. There are Republicans and Democrats, as I said, at the state level that are working on this.
Yeah, but that you certainly can find numerous governors who are working against what you would declare to be your new energy economy.
Well, I'll tell you, that's also pretty interesting. And having been a governor, I can say this. The governors may say one thing, and then their people do something else. And so we actually are working with 13 Western governors on the President's Clean Power Plan. And there's very much a conversation happening sort of at the political level where people are saying, we don't like the EPA, we're going to sue the EPA. We are not happy with the Clean Power Plan. But when we convene all the energy and environment leads from those 13 states, they're saying, we actually think there's a way to do this. And if we're forced to do it by the EPA, we'll get to implementation. And here's some of the things we want you to think about in getting there. So it's not, if you're hearing only that, the Republican governors are opposed to this, there may be some of that happening, and as I said, from sort of the bully pulpit, but there are people in states working on trying to understand how to advance the clean energy agenda. The governor of Wyoming is a very conservative Republican. He's a friend of mine, and I consider him a friend. He said last summer, listen, I'm not a person who's been out there trying to clean up coal, and coal is a big thing in Wyoming, but he said, the markets are telling me I'm wrong about Wyoming's future. And so we need to recreate a different future for Wyoming than a coal future, than only a coal economy, because the stock market is actually telling me I need to do that. And those are the kinds of things that are happening, Dan, that some of them are driven by market, some of them are driven by economic opportunity, and certainly there's among both Democrat and Republican governors, there are those who are looking at this and believing that climate change is real and it's impacting their state in a very serious way.
Still, even though if they are saying if the power plan is implemented, we will adapt, at the same time you still have governors like Mr. Meade who are saying that they will sue, or they are suing over this clean power plan. And the governors of these coal states, they do say that this is, a fundamental piece of their economy, and that they will have to completely reshape how their economy runs if coal is removed as this major linchpin of what they do.
So they did set aside $2 million in Wyoming to sue the EPA over the Clean Power Plan. They're absolutely going to do that. The EPA has been winning lawsuits in front of the Supreme Court. They're used to getting sued. They get sued by both sides, the environmental side and the industry side. Everybody expects that there will be lawsuits. There's actually oral arguments on Thursday being heard in Washington, D.C. around a Clean Power Plan lawsuit, the first big lawsuit that's going to be heard by a 3-judge panel. So yeah, that's happening. But I'll tell you, and maybe Matt Meade is not the best example. Governor Snyder in Michigan is a pretty conservative Republican who's looking at it and saying, okay, we're importing 100% of our coal. We produce no coal here, so we're bringing that in from other states. It's about 70% of our entire portfolio. The 2 utility CEOs are telling me I should never build another coal plant in Michigan, so what are my options? He's creating, as a Republican, a clean energy plan that looks at renewable energy and natural gas production. And so it's domestic energy, right? And it also will address a variety of economic and environmental challenges. And they're paying more money for coal-fired generation than they would be paying if they imported wind power from Iowa. The governor of Iowa is a Republican. He knows it, so he's looking at it as at wind energy as an economic opportunity for him. The governor of Kansas is every bit as conservative as Matt Meade is in Kansas, but they're now starting to export Kansas wind into the southeast, where they have a big bet on coal. And the governor of Kansas is, by and large, refused to take apart the renewable energy standard, even when conservative groups have proposed legislation in Kansas to do that. So I guess I'm seeing it as half full. You may be seeing sort of the half empty side. That's your reporter sort of bias, I suspect. And my, sort of my governor bias, I want it to work. I want this to work out okay. And so, yes, there is still this fight going on in this country. Congress experiences it in a far bigger place. But I think the governors who are closer to the ground, paying attention to their people, and watching what people think about not just climate change issues, but public health and environmental issues, are actually being part of this clean energy transition.
Well, I wanted to touch on that a little bit. So as far as, I think in many ways, in many parts of the country, especially renewable power, is still kind of presented under the lens of being part of the partisan divide, and that oftentimes green energy is just instantly associated with the left. And you did mention some examples of that, against that. And I would use another example, say Cory Gardner's Senate campaign, where he has some campaign ads where he's standing in front of wind power. There are exceptions to that, but are there any inklings you see of the GOP being more willing to accept and grapple onto clean energy, or is this a debate that will continue to be partisan?
Yeah, and this isn't the best way to manage energy policy through tax credits, but the production tax credit had a lot of Republican support. It didn't make it, but it had a lot of Republican support. This is just how bizarre the United States Congress is. There was a bill called the Shaheen-Portman bill that was more about energy efficiency, and it had actually bipartisan majority support. So it had, Portman is a Republican from Ohio, had pretty good Republican support, but they were so afraid of riders that would come that involved the Keystone Pipeline that they never actually heard the bill, in spite of the fact that having bipartisan Republican support. So yeah, I think it's far less partisan than it was 2 or 3 years ago. There's more economic opportunity. One of the things that Tom and I and others have been working on is looking at the state of Nebraska. So Nebraska has the fourth best wind in the country, out of any state in the country, and it only has 700 megawatts of wind installed. By comparison, that's less than about 25% of what we have in Colorado, with less good wind than they have in Nebraska. And so there now is a unicameral legislature up there, right? A lot of Republicans looking at how they make use of that. And one of the reasons they're doing it is they're looking south to Kansas, who's found economic opportunity in building wind, north to South Dakota, which has 20-some% of their entire grid is wind energy. Iowa is finding ways to export that into the Midwest market, and they're losing out on this economic opportunity by not doing wind. And so there are opportunities for solar. Texas is a very conservative state. You can, shoot a cannon off, and many streets in Texas never hit a Democrat, right? And so, and yet, having said that, you got to make energy policy funny at some point, right? You can't just allow it to remain staid. So in Texas, they're now understanding, well, we've got 11,000 megawatts of wind. They got more wind installed in Texas than any other state. We can do that for solar. How do we do that? And actually, it's policy, right? They need net metering, they need interconnection standards, and they need to understand what kind of an additional sort of incentive they can put in place. It doesn't have to be a lot because of the size of the resource, and they can build an industry there, and they're going to do it because in Texas, the thing they understand is economic opportunity.
Shifting gears a little bit. During your tenure, we have talked. You were such an ardent supporter of renewable energy and expanding the renewable energy economy here in the state. Your successor, Governor John Hickenlooper, he has also made energy a priority of his administration, but largely his priority has been oil and gas. I wonder, what are your reflections upon Governor Hickenlooper's take on energy? Do you find it misguided, or is he moving to a more practical energy economy to fit with the boom times?
So I really think the Colorado Rockies are actually going to have a better season than they had last year. I don't know. They didn't do much to trade in the off season, but one of the things, if you've been in public life, I started in public life in 1993, and about a third of the way into the question, you just say, well, this is one I don't have to answer. Here's the deal on this. We actually did promote natural gas. We started by rewriting the rules around oil and gas production because we as a state had not done what was necessary to try and really take into account the impact of hydraulic fracturing and the really big build-out that had happened, particularly on the western slope. We were the first state to modernize our rules. I give Governor Hickenlooper a lot of credit because they've added to the things that we did in 07 and 08 with 4 significant rules. And the last rule that they passed, the methane monitoring rule, really puts Colorado in a place, again, of being the toughest state in the country with respect to with oil and gas regulation. And the other thing we did was in 2010, under my administration, we had a Clean Air, Clean Jobs was the name of the act, but we took down 1 gigawatt of coal and replaced it with natural gas. I would have never done that had I not felt comfortable that we in Colorado had done a better job of regulating the industry than when I had taken office. Now, what I'll tell you is this is a moving target. It's evolving. The federal government just put in place rules for development of oil and gas on BLM land, and actually nobody was really happy about it. The environmentalist community said, not tough enough. The industry said, way too rigid. And that's the kind of battle that you have in public policy when you're trying to carve out sort of an energy agenda for the nation. So we made a lot of progress on renewables. We got to this 30% standard. Governor Hickenlooper doubled the standard for rural electrics, for rural electric co-ops, and I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for the fact that that was not only a fairly difficult thing to do, but there was some political liability in his election in 2014 that was part of the conversation in rural areas, is that he had doubled the renewable electric standard for rurals. The interesting thing about this, to just kind of go from because I think Governor Hickenlooper has a focus on energy, and I think that he's done some really good work, and there are things that you might do differently if I was still governor, or that he would have done differently. But the fact of the matter is, you build on what other people have done. So he didn't have to do a 30% standard, and he did sort of the thing that was necessary. What we should pay attention to is what the naysayers said about a renewable energy standard in 2004, before I was governor, when the people of Colorado passed one, in 2007, when we passed the 20%, in 2010, when we passed the 30%. The naysayers said it would be too expensive. They said you couldn't get enough of it on the grid, you couldn't integrate it on the grid, and that, quite frankly, there's no way this 2% cap was going to work. I mean, all of those things, and none of them turned out to be true. None of them. So we as a state now, there are days when Xcel puts almost 60% of the power that they deliver to customers is wind energy. And they integrate that largely with natural gas. They still have a coal fleet, but they integrate that wind with gas because it's easier to do in terms of bringing the wind up and down. And it still has an intermittency. It's 3-cent purchase agreements, power purchase agreements that we're watching. Those were 9 cents in 2006, and they've been cut in a third. There's still a production tax credit. So the real cost of that's probably about 5-cent wind, which is cheaper than coal. And it's no carbon. And so ratepayers have not only not been harmed by it, they've actually they're better off as a result of it. And the reduction in emissions, Xcel Energy, if you look at their 2005 emissions and their 2020 emissions, it's a reduction of 35%, probably the best of any utility in America in terms of that 15-year span. And so we go back to it and say, who's holding the naysayers accountable for, kind of pushing back on this stuff? And there's still an effort to undo renewable energy standards in America. The Texas Senate did just actually vote to undo their renewable energy standards, so I probably shouldn't be too proud of Texas. But the fact of the matter is, we got to hold these naysayers accountable, because what they predicted to be the case when we did some fairly bold things in Colorado turned out not to be true.
I guess that was an answer. Now, you are on record as supporting natural gas as a part of the new energy economy, provided it's done responsibly. Yet, of course, hydraulic fracturing is a major controversial issue in this state, more of a hot-button energy issue than anything else. How do you make the environmental argument for hydraulic fracturing?
Well, I think the environmental argument involves a lot of pieces, and you have to parse it out. I'm a supporter of natural gas if the industry is regulated in a very serious way so that you can account for the environmental impacts, and if there's this culture of compliance inside the industry, and finally, if there's strong enforcement. If those things are missing, then I think you have to ask the question, okay, then what are the environmental impacts absent strong regulations or absent strong enforcement, and really do a cost accounting for those issues. Air and air quality is certainly one of those things, and Colorado was the first state to pass capture rules, methane capture rules. The EPA has actually passed their own rules, and when they passed that rule, it was 3 years after Colorado's rules took effect, and Colorado operators had to do nothing new to comply with the EPA because of what we'd already put in place in 2009. As I said, Governor Hickenlooper did even more than that by requiring more significant monitoring. And that monitoring, I think, helps operators understand how much methane may be leaking, and then really have to be held accountable for that. So that's the air side. That's not the only air side. There's volatile or organic compounds that are a part of the mix when you have oil and gas operations. There's carbon dioxide just from the emissions, the vehicle emissions that are a part of it. And so places like Pinedale, Wyoming, the population of Pinedale is smaller than the number of people in this room, and they were in a non-compliance order from the EPA because of all the oil and gas development that was happening and what happened to their air quality as a result of it. So that's important for operators to understand. There's an air impact beyond just the possibility of methane leakage. The water aquifers is a big impact. Interestingly, a lot of people will say, and they're pretty close to being true when they say there's never been a hydraulic fracturing incident that's implicated the aquifer. It's probably not altogether true, but the fact of the matter is that's not the big issue. We're involved in a project with Dr. Ken Carlson here at CSU that looks at aquifers in a 24/7 way, and we can talk about that if you want to. But what we do know is that managing water, processed water, and fracking fluid when it comes back out of the ground is actually the biggest issue we have in this state. And not just in this state, across the United States. And so there's a lot of ways to implicate water quality if you're not managing it well when it comes out of the ground. There's ways to implicate the seismic activity underground if you're injecting it in deep well injections where there are significant faults, or maybe not significant faults, but faults that are underground. You can actually cause seismic activity. So there's a lot of parts to this equation that have to do with things other than just, is the aquifer safe when you're taking the fracking fluid in and bringing it back out?
Finally, Governor, the U.S. up until 2008 was the leader in renewable energy technologies and renewable energy investment. And last I looked, we are now sitting at number 3 behind both China and Germany. Have we lost our edge when it comes to renewable energy? And if not, what bright spots do you see?
Well, first of all, I think on the technology side, most of what's still happening with respect to technical innovations in renewables comes out of the United States. So I don't think we've lost our technological edge, our innovation edge, but we certainly lost the manufacturing edge to China where panels were concerned. And I went to China while I was governor. I've been back to China twice with CSU. You can stand on the edge of a panel manufacturing process in China. You can stand on one edge of it and not see the other end of it. It's so big. And largely these are state-owned enterprises as well, or the early ones were state-owned enterprises, and there was definitely some subsidies that were happening. And it's the reason there was a trade case that the United States filed against China over the panels. Now, they are producing panels in such a cheap fashion that we in the United States cannot manufacture panels and keep up. We just can't. So we've lost the manufacturing war, but I would argue that the things that are happening in terms of technological innovations, efficiencies around panels themselves, and even thin film photovoltaic, those are still spaces that are owned by U.S. and U.S. manufacturers. On wind, we probably are doing as much as other manufacturers, but the world's biggest manufacturer is Vestas, and it's producing panels in Colorado, 4 different plants, but their technology web is in Denmark. So they're probably doing as much as other companies around the world, including GE in the United States, Clipper Wind in the United States. So we have wind companies, but that's kind of a push, I think. I wouldn't think that you could say any one company has had the biggest advances as it relates to wind technology. On storage technology, the United States is going to figure that out. We're going to sort of win that battle on storage technology because of the number of really significant players are still working on that, and what a different storage technology will be in taking away intermittency with respect to solar particularly.
And rumor is Tesla is going to make a big announcement on storage here in the next month, at the end of the month.
We have some cool things happening here at CSU on storage that could wind up, if it works well for the people who are the creators or the inventors, being breakthrough technology as well.
Great. All right, Director of the Center for the New Energy Economy, Bill Ritter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Kicking off the second half of our presentation, there are a lot of amazing ideas that have their birthplace right here in this very room. And what I love about this space is that we're right in the middle of it. But it takes a lot to go from idea to prototype to business to product that's actually out there in the world. So next we're going to have someone who can actually guide you through that process because he knows a lot about it. Not only is he a PhD in chemical engineering and a professor here at CSU, but he also holds many patents and has been involved in many startup companies. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Ken Reardon. He's one of the directors here at the CSU Energy Institute, Powerhouse, and he will be leading us through a panel. And fun fact about Ken, when he is not changing the world with new energy innovations, he loves to ride his road bike around northern Colorado.
All right, thank you.
All right, and I've got your, yeah. Go ahead.
So thank you very much. I'd like to invite the panelists up here on the stage as well, and I'll be introducing them in just a moment. So as Jordan mentioned, I'm Ken Reardon. I'm a co-director here of the Energy Institute. And I think you've been hearing this evening about a lot of the great ideas that are happening here at CSU. And what we want to get into right now is the fact that a lot of these ideas aren't just interesting and cool. They actually have the potential to make a big impact on how we do and work with energy around the world. And so CSU researchers, our students and professors who are developing all these great ideas, we've got a long track record of patents and licensing. And some of those great ideas have even been the foundations for startup companies that have come from CSU. A really great example of them is EnviroFit International. It's a CSU startup that has sold more than 1 million clean-burning cook stoves in the developing world. And they're on the other side of that big silvery cube. You can see a cool station that shows you some of the work that they've been doing on this. So EnviroFit, actually, like a lot of our companies, has followed this path of what we call tech to market. So technology moving from idea to becoming more established, to adoption, and then to having a big impact. And so I'm standing in front of my great graphic, but one way that we like to think about this is that there's kind of a river of innovation, that you move along this river. It's a little bit unpredictable. It winds, it curves. Sometimes it goes over its banks. Sometimes it's exciting. Sometimes it's quieter. But all the way along, the invention moving from the first idea to ultimate commercialization and impact, there are a lot of organizations that have to come into play and help that along. And so the panel here this evening is representative of the organizations that we work with here at CSU, part of our ecosystem for innovation. And I want to introduce to you our panelists and a little bit about what they and their organizations do, and then let them tell you more themselves. And so we start here with Todd Headley from CSU Ventures. The Ventures handles the licensing and patent work, but they work with our inventors to develop their ideas further and help them understand what's really patentable and who might be interested in the license. And then if a company, if the inventors decide not just licensing and patents, but they really want to be the ones to drive their idea to commercialization, and one of the things they can do when they start their company is work with the Inosphere here in Fort Collins. And Doug Johnson is the leadership at the Institute, at the Inosphere. And the Inosphere helps those companies, those brand new baby companies, find out where they are in the whole process and what they can do to grow up and be successful. And once they are in that success stage and they're really companies that are getting going, then there are companies, there are organizations that help these companies get further developed and networked in with the other companies that are here in Colorado in the clean energy space. And we have Tom Gadosi here from the Colorado Clean Energy Cluster and Chris Shepard from the Colorado Clean Tech Industry Association. And they'll tell you more about how they encourage and support what clean tech companies do. And so I'm going to pass the mic around to each of them and let them tell you more about their organizations. Todd?
Thank you, Ken. So as Ken mentioned, CSU Ventures, we're actually a nonprofit, and we were established to do the technology transfer for Colorado State University. And so the big three things we do is, one, we work with the faculty and researchers to help them, as Ken mentioned, protect their intellectual property. We work with industry and investors who may be interested in working with CSU researchers or investing in CSU research. And then also we look at leveraging CSU innovation to foster business formation and economic development in northern Colorado. Oh, it's a moving slide. Now you can spin it all the way around if you like to. And probably many of you have seen some version of this, but it's just kind of a high-level view of, starting at the beginning, where Ken certainly is on the research side, moving through the process, intellectual property, company formation, commercial development, ultimately impact. But one thing I can mention is over the last about 5 years in clean energy, we've had 54 invention disclosures in clean energy, about 20 license agreements, nearly 100 patent applications, and about 5 startup companies. And you're probably thinking, okay, what does that mean? But if you look at the previous 5 years compared to that, that's about a 500% growth in every one of those categories in the last 5 years. So there's been a huge jump in the output in clean energy innovation at CSU just in the last few years, and in large part due to researchers like Ken and Brian in this building and the energy behind that. So in terms of examples of the types of energy or types of innovation that we see here, I'd kind of roughly put them into 3 areas. One would be sort of the typical energy generation side. So examples of that would have been Abound Solar. Many of you would be familiar with that. They were in the PV space. Solex originally started in the biofuel space, and currently Pareto Battery, which is at the energy storage space. Second example maybe would be looking more toward developing world sort of things, and Ken mentioned EnviroFit. They're a great example of that, focusing on solutions in the developing world. And then the last category that I think we actually see a lot of work in, and Ken's company, Optiens, for example, would be in this, are technologies we're trying to make energy cleaner, or looking at the impact of energy on the environment. And we have several startup companies in that space, eFlux, Optiens, Metrochip, Access Sensor Technologies, that all fall into that space. Those are all sensor technologies. So that's just kind of a brief overview of some of the types of technologies, some of the types of companies. That's about 6 or 8 companies right there that have been spun out of CSU just in the last few years to work on the energy space.
Terrific, thank you. I'm Doug Johnson, Vice President for the Rocky Mountain Inosphere. The Inosphere is a 16-year-old nonprofit technology incubator. And I'm proud to say that CSU has been our partner from the beginning. We work very closely together. Our Director of Entrepreneurial Programs, Maggie Flanagan, works closely with Todd and his team. Once Todd and his team have identified those faculty that want to raise their hand and say, I think there's a company here, then we start to work together. And we assess where they're at, what they may need, and what value can we bring to support our partners at CSU and advance these technologies. And I'll use Ken as a perfect example. With his technology of Optiens, very clean handoff, and working with Ken to help him identify team and funding, business development opportunities, and key connections. Think of us as an extension of your business team. Typically, we see a solopreneur, a technologist who comes in and knows the technology, may not know the business. And that's where we step in and really help with that business formation. A little bit about the Inosphere, again, 16 years old, nonprofit funded by a variety of partners, both state and local, as well as private foundations, banks, and law firms, who really believe in our primary mission of economic development and job creation by supporting hard science technology startups. And the way we do that, I'll take Ken on a journey through us. If he was to start today, he would apply. We would know he was coming because of our good relationship with CSU Ventures. He would apply. We would assess, can we add value to his technology and his team? Do we have the expertise we can call on? Do we have the networks, the funding networks, the business development support, the right expertise from legal and accounting to put around him and give him the unfair competitive advantage to get to revenue more quickly? Once we determine that, yes, we can do that, we'll bring the company in, and we do a hybrid accelerator incubator experience. We run our startup companies through a 5 full-day program intensive spread out over 6 weeks. And here they're talking about the nuts and bolts of business, partnership agreements. What do you need in place to bring on key employees? Who's validated your technology? You say it works. Who else has said it works? And how are you going to get those connections to go out into industry and allow them to test your technology on their equipment? That's a big step. Customer development. You've developed this incredible technology, so what? Who's going to use it? Is somebody going to pay for it? So guiding them through customer discovery, using lean methodologies, try to minimize cash and investment up front until we know that this company's got a product market fit and a strong go-to-market strategy. Once we've determined that, then that's my role. I step in, and Governor Ritter said it best, a lot of this technology and these companies respond very well to market signals. My role is to go out and talk to the investment community, high net worth individuals, angels, organized angel groups, venture capital, and corporate and strategic, understand the types of technologies they're looking for and understand how they typically invest in them, and then turn around and serve our clients by giving them strategic and rifle shot opportunities for funding conversations versus the typical shotgun approach, hope somebody will stick and pull out their checkbook and make all your dreams come true. Once they've hit that funding milestone or a revenue milestone, we consider them a graduate. We've taken them as far as they can. They're going to exit our program and go out into the community and do what they do, whether that's become a headquarter company, be venture-backed and potentially go IPO, or be acquired through an early exit program where they're building technology for a larger Coca-Cola or Arrow or Schlumberger or somebody of that nature.
I'm Tom Gadosi. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors for the Colorado Clean Energy Cluster. When I say I'm part of the Clean Energy Cluster, my wife says, why is it called a cluster? That just doesn't sound very good. I said, well, that's what it is. We're going to live with it. But what we are is an organization of municipalities, universities, private industry, consulting firms, manufacturers, and the whole idea is to put together this group of different kinds of companies, different kinds of entities to be able to create things that we wouldn't be able to create otherwise. As a small consulting firm with 30 people, I can't walk into the city of Boulder and say, hey, I've got this wonderful idea. And they say, well, we don't have anybody that's interested in your idea. What are you talking about? Go down to the mall and do juggling and you'll be fine. So what we have, though, is the city can come up with a concept. So in one of our prime examples is Fort Zed, the Zero Energy District in Fort Collins, which the CSU Powerhouse is a part of. And it meets several different kinds of things that we're trying to accomplish in a global community sense. The city has some goals. The companies like Spray have some goals, some things they want to try out. The university has goals and objectives. They want to get research involved, get students involved, be able to demonstrate some of these things, and also to create an environment where risks can be taken. Because as we've all heard on a lot of this new energy economy, all the things going on, this isn't business as usual. So if you're going to change from business as usual and you look at the complexity and the reliance that we place on electricity or energy, you don't get to experiment very easily. So here, the Clean Energy Cluster is helping to create this place, this experimental space where new ideas can be tried out. Things can fail, that's okay, because out of failure comes ultimate success. So it's an opportunity for the established companies, and especially the universities who's, hey, we've got a lot of great ideas, but where could we really put them into place and see what's wrong, what's good, what's bad? And it's been very exciting for us to be able to see this development and start seeing it create in Colorado more vision of this clean energy economy, where more and more companies are looking to it saying, hey, there are opportunities here. And we have initiatives that are several companies in the group might participate in, or one of the cities, Boulder, might participate, and Fort Collins might say, no, we've already got something else headed in a different direction. It gives a lot of opportunity for new ideas to show up and to be tested and bring some of these concepts together. And that's one of the things that we've always struggled with is you can put out a request for proposal, but you don't know what to write. What is it that I'm looking for? I'm trying something new nobody's ever done before, so this is a way for us to do that.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Chris Shepard. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Clean Tech Industries Association. We're a statewide business association for the clean tech companies and organizations in Colorado. Think of us as the Chamber of Commerce for clean tech for the state of Colorado. We have 150 members. We've been around 6 years, and we provide networking, programs and events, and policy representation at the state legislature and in DC. And I'll talk about a couple examples of what we do for the companies here in the state. So our members are companies, small, large, two people, all the way up to companies like Schneider Electric and GM. But we also work with all the universities. The investors are members of ours, and other economic development groups. So we're kind of like the center of everything that goes on in the state. So we make connections between all of those different groups to grow jobs in Colorado. So we're basically an economic development group. But in our work with the universities, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we've done with CSU. So we were able to garner a grant from a national organization, and out of that grant we were able to contribute about $40,000 to CSU to support some of the projects that are going on in clean energy development. And so $40,000, that's not much, is it? But that enabled CSU to put money into 4 projects that helped with prototype development, helped them fund some patent exploration, create some additional units to take out into the field to get more clients and do more tests. So that's an example of how we work with the universities and how we help them move technology from the lab into the marketplace. Then once these companies once the technologies grow up, become companies, go to the Inosphere, possibly work with CCEC, then they're able to receive awards from a program at the state legislature that we lobbied for called the Advanced Industry Accelerator Grant Program. So we created a program, state of Colorado has funded it out of the general budget, and it allows $250,000 to $500,000 of grants to startup companies in the state. So companies that have come from CSU or Fort Collins that have received that funding are Lightning Hybrids, Prieto Battery, and Opteon Sensors. So you see from our advocacy on behalf of the industry, we're able to bring funding down to not just the company level, but also into the universities.
So thank you very much, all of you. Appreciate your time here. And I'm sure some people in the audience might have questions for you later, but I think we're on with the rest of the program. Thanks again very much.
Okay, while we are getting set up, oops, oh gosh, oh. Did I do that? Probably. Do we lose our visuals? One second, folks. All right. We do have another Oiler Pickle, and this time you get to actually know the word before you decide to play. So you've got a leg up here. Do we have one? I think this is our last one, so one final contestant. Actually, this is the penultimate Oiler Pickle.
Oh, this one, she raised her hand.
Yes!
Enthusiastically, I might add.
What is your name, ma'am? What was that?
Paula.
Paula. All right, Oshinko. That is
she knows.
Absolutely right. She was like, yes, I know that one. Thank you for playing. You can get a fabulous prize at your leisure when you're ready. All right. Here you go, Dan. Take it away.
Next speaker is another one of Jordan and I's superiors. Harris Revine. I did say correctly, I had to practice earlier. He is the COO at Rocky Mountain PBS, which from the way I understand it, you took your job after leaving a Fortune 500 company to join public broadcasting, one of the bravest men on the planet, Harris Irvine.
It's actually worse than that. Thank you. This is my third failure at retirement. And to make it worse, way back when in the 80s, I was chairman of Twin Cities Public Television. Left there to come to Colorado, obviously showing good judgment. Only 30 years later to find myself drafted back to doing this again and being very fortunate. I hope any of you who actually get a chance to retire are as fortunate as I am to be able to be involved with something as important and at the same time as much fun as I get to do every day, being part of what we're seeing tonight and all the other things that public media can do for the community. Because we, at the end of the day, as you've heard any number of times, you're our bosses, and I hope what we're doing tonight is just one more example of meeting your needs and being important. There are three things that I wanted to cover tonight, and I want to do this as quickly as I can because I appreciate the fact that everybody has stayed, and there are plenty of other places to do, and it's been a long day. The first one is I want to acknowledge CSU and Tony Frank, as well as everybody here at the Power Energy Campus for making this possible and being a part of with that. This is an important event in many respects, probably more important than everybody realizes. Secondly, I want to specifically talk about the Energy Institute here at CSU, who've been a co-sponsor with us in this event. Last, and as they always say, but not least, I'd like to thank all of the Inside Energy partners. This may look like Rocky Mountain Public Broadcasting show, but in fact KUNC, one of our partners, is here. Wyoming Public Radio came down to be part of this, and I know several of the others, if they could have gotten away, would have been here as well. And it's real important what they're doing, and I want to talk about that in a second. So thank you to everybody who made this event possible. Thank you. One of the things that I was asked to talk specifically about two things. Actually, that wasn't one of them. What was my first, I don't know what the right way to put it is, my first experience with or recognition of why energy is important. And I have a hunch that what I went through in coming to my own answer for that was shared by a number of people in this room. My first thought was thinking about a 1955 sort of yellow Ford convertible, which I ended up buying. It was the first car I had, and thinking about how I was going to pay 25 cents a gallon for gas. I hope maybe some of these can remember 25-cent gas. I know there are some people here that were not only not born, but even their parents may not have been born when we had 25-cent gas. But I don't think that I really understood why energy was important. It just was an inconvenience financially because I didn't have a lot of money. Then I thought about, well, when I got married and the first time I got an electricity bill. And again, it was a bit of a shock. Again, I didn't have a whole lot of money, but I knew that we were going to have it, and I just assumed that we just were always going to have energy, and I was just going to have to figure out how to pay for it. A few years after that, I found myself in London on business, trying to get back to the States, and hearing on the radio and the BBC that they expected to be out of fuel. This was 1973, 74. And all of a sudden it began to dawn on me that without energy in an affordable fashion available to everybody, I was going to be stuck in London, away from my family for the foreseeable future because there was no way. And I was sitting there, I was in a cab going back to my hotel and found out about this because a cab driver started explaining to me that I probably couldn't get to the airport the next day. That's when it began to dawn on me that what we're talking about tonight and all of the things, whether it was from what Governor Ritter talked about or all of the great work that's going on and the whole eco cycle when you talk about how we're going to bring those products to market with all the work that's getting done, how really dependent we all are. I'm sure we've all had those different, we wouldn't be here tonight if we didn't have that recognition. That was my first experience where I really understood what energy was about. And fortunately, I've been on my various careers involved in finding solutions and bringing products to market in that area and otherwise working on it. Also had the opportunity to spend time with the legislature working on the regulations that Governor Ritter talked about. And so I've seen this issue from a number of fashions. The last point I was asked to talk about, and it's a great way to close the cycle that I've talked about, I'm referring to, is the fact of why is Rocky Mountain Public Broadcasting involved with this. As I was listening to the governor and listening to all the other speakers tonight, it dawned on me, I thought about the old line about if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, does it make a noise, right? That's our role. We want to make sure that public media, if no one else, will bring these stories and talk about what's going on and make sure that the community is informed and aware and hopefully even understands what all this complexity is about, why it's important, and hopefully will ignite some conversations so that you, all of you in the community, will take action, pay attention, and do something about this. Because without that happening, it's just another tree falling in the forest with nobody there. So thank you for being here, and more importantly, thank you for caring enough about these issues to make what everybody here tonight has talked about worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so our next presenter, I can't tell you how excited I was when I found out what he's going to be talking about, because if you've spent more than 5 minutes with me, you know that one of my all-time favorite subjects is waste. Everything from run-of-the-mill trash to industrial waste to, yes, even feces. And I promise this is going to be much more exciting and much less gross than it sounds. We're going to be hearing how John Mizia is going to be reinventing the toilet, making it do things you would never imagined that a toilet could do. But before he comes up here, I just wanted to also let you know that before his career as someone changing the world through toilets, he actually spent a decade launching rockets from Colorado, including missions that have gone to Mars. So that's pretty cool. But what he's doing right now is arguably even cooler. So without further ado, John Mizia. All right.
Thank you, Jordan.
And
All right.
your weapon.
All right, so we're definitely going to change gears here. I'm a full-time research scientist over here at the Powerhouse, and I spend a majority of my time working with biomass, and feces obviously is one of those. And I'm going to talk about energy, biomass, and sanitation. So it's pretty easy looking at this image. It was taken from the International Space Station. Because I worked in the aerospace world, I get pretty excited about things like this. And it's easy looking at this image to tell what energy is and the usefulness of something like a light bulb. Excuse me. But there's less glamorous forms of energy use, and one of those is wastewater. So this is the Denver Bob Height Wastewater Treatment Facility. It processes water for about 1.7 million individuals and treats on the order of 130 million gallons of water every day. And it's a great facility, but it's incredibly energy intensive. And so what do you do when you don't have energy to treat the wastewater? You end up being one of the other 2.5 billion people on the planet that don't have access to a safe place to go. And of those 2.5 billion people, about 1 billion of those have to rely on something like open defecation. And so this photo on the left is a public toilet from Ahmedabad, India. We're working with Research Triangle Institute in North Carolina. And they went and purviewed a whole bunch of these different public toilet facilities. This is actually one of the cleaner ones. And the people have said that they will walk upwards of 20 minutes a day to make it to the facility and then wait in a queue another 30 to 40 minutes to actually use the toilet. And so what happens is when you gotta go, you gotta go. And so sometimes you don't make it, and there's a lot of open defecation happening right near one of these toilets. Still, in other cases, you have people relieving themselves directly into water sources. And this obviously, when you have people working downstream of you on collecting their water for cooking or washing their clothes or children playing, certainly this is not a good scenario. So what does this mean? Well, it's one of the leading causes of death in children under 5. Over 700,000 children die every year from diarrheal diseases that can be attributed to direct fecal oral contamination. And it's no wonder with children running around without shoes that you would have these instances. And I think if you were to gather your thoughts and think about what it would look like to have 1 billion people open defecating, you could see the propensity of maybe stepping on one. I know in Fort Collins, my wife says I step on them all the time, but I find myself, stepping upon uncollected dog feces, and I'm lucky that I don't have to worry about whether or not it's a human feces. And so on the right-hand side, we have a helminth parasite infection of an intestine. This is one of the most prolific infections of humans in the developing world. It affects on the order of 2 billion people. The eggs of the helminth are an amazing device that is very difficult to kill, and it lives in human feces. About 2 billion people are infected. 300 million of those have what they consider heavy contamination, where you have something like this heavy intestinal infection. Clearly, there's a cost to this. So how do we fit into this? Well, as part of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Reinvent the Toilet Challenge, we've been working with Research Triangle Institute in North Carolina to work on feces, and specifically a fecal combustor that can be used in a sanitation system. And the big one that makes it difficult, you saw the Denver facility, you have to shrink this into a package that is completely self-contained. You can't plumb this thing in, you can't have water, no electricity, and it has to operate at 5 cents per person per day. So very ambitious goals. So CSU did what any good combustion scientist would do when they found out they needed to work on a fecal combustor. First I went to Morgan. He's got a dog, Jack, and he was able to give us some of his dog's waste. We went to Ace Hardware, bought ourselves a meat grinder, processed the waste through a meat grinder, put it into a simple dehydrator, and came up with a very simple combustor using just a little tiny fan. And it worked very well. And because we operate and do a lot of work in the cook stoves world, we recognize that another leading cause of death in children under 5 is indoor air pollution. And so we don't have the ability to put a scrubber on the toilet when we're burning the fecal matter, or have electrostatic precipitators for the particulate. So we knew we had to get the best combustor possible without any exotic features. And so we had to land over here in this left-hand side with the technology called a gasifier. And so to go through it pretty simple here, a gasifier really takes a solid material, you evolve all the volatile chemicals inside of the biomass, and then you can take that pyrolysis gas and combust it in a very clean manner. It's a very controlled means of burning a biomass, and I think it's the opposite of something like a cook stove, or not a cook stove, like a campfire, where you have just a bunch of wood laying in an open space, you have flames whipping, very difficult to predict what's exactly going to happen inside of a camp stove or a campfire. So after about 10 iterations working on all kinds of various design, we came up with what we lovingly called the acifier. And so this is a fully automated fecal combustor, and it's a pretty unique package. It's a small device. It can operate anywhere in sort of the 2.5 kilowatt to 5 kilowatt range, so we can sanitize somewhere between 5 and 50 individual users' waste. We have a hopper with an auger that transports the fecal material into the combustor. We have the combustor, we have an ash removal technology, and then we have an exhaust system that ultimately will transport the exhaust to the other parts of the toilet. So when we say reinvent the toilet, it's not just the toilet. This is one small piece of the toilet. So what does it look like? So this is an animation that Research Triangle Institute put together to help show sort of how the fecal combustor fits in together with this overall package. Now, there's a lot I'm gonna go through here, and it's gonna be pretty fast, but it's a pretty neat video. When it works. I hit it, here it goes. Yep, see, there's the delay. So, squat plate, which is conventional for the region, you have a solid liquid separator. The feces is transported on a conveyor into what we call the macerator homogenizer. It's pushed into a extrusion device. The feces is heated so that it actually sears the outside, passes through a tumble dryer, gets collected in a reservoir, transported up an auger, back into the combustor. This is where it gets great. The combustion exhaust is actually used to dry the incoming feces. Residual thermal energy is converted into electricity, and then the electricity is used on the liquid side. The liquid separator, again in action, there's a sediment tank, ultimately being processed through an electrochemical cell using the energy that was created by the very own feces. So literally taking waste and turning it into energy. The water is then recycled back and gives people a flushing toilet, which is something that they really aren't used to. So it's really an amazing gathering of technologies into one package. So where do we go with this? Right now we have, together with RTI, there is a unit that has been fielded in Vedadora, India, and these are actually some of the people who were used for some of the individuals' tests, not actual using the toilet, but just getting user feedback. And this is a group of people who live in a small community, no access to water, no access to sanitation, and they use a canal not only to defecate and relieve themselves, but also to collect water for food and clothing. Next stop, back to India again. We just, on Monday, shipped out the latest version of the combustor, and it's being integrated into the final package. That unit is being shipped to Ahmedabad, India, where it will actually go through some controlled true fecal deposit tests. So we'll actually bring users in. They'll use the toilet to be much more controlled. We can't just throw this thing out there. One, people are probably going to steal a lot of the parts in there, but it's a very interesting time. We're very excited about the opportunities we have, and we're really just cracking the nut on this. So, thank you.
Thank you, that was great. So cool, so cool. We really wanted to get one of those here for you to try tonight, but unfortunately, not this time. For that, you have to come to our next event. But yeah, that was amazing.
Do we have another oil or pickle?
We do. We got one last one.
We do. You guys are so lucky.
Because you have stayed to the end of the presentation, we have one more.
And it's our favorite kind of them, which is the Twitter kind. So you can get on your phones right now and tweet your guess of Bonnie.
Bonnie!
Everybody's so stoked.
Is it a Bonnie we oil or a Bonnie we pickle?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. We'll have to look it up later on the Twitter after I follow Inside Energy Now, because that would help us all out a lot.
All right, so we have reached our very last segment of the night, and to wrap things up, we're going to be talking about disruptive technology. So what does that mean exactly? It's like how the wheel that shook up those Flintstone cars that, no? Okay, no, I'm actually talking more like the cell phone, how that rocked the telecom sector in the 1990s, or MP3s, how that really shook things up in the music industry in the 2000s. We may actually be on the verge of a similar game-changing transformation with our nation's electrical grid. From what?
That's right, everyone. From Kevin Larimore, Public Works Supervisor at the City of Del Norte. No, that's a joke. We're talking about solar power, but in order to fully understand what we're talking about and how it fits into Colorado's energy future, first we're going to need to take a step back into the past. We're going to learn about this building in a minute.
But first, take it away, Mr. Souza.
Yes, Jordan, you brought your greatest hits of the 1880s mixtape?
Yes.
I've been more nervous about that high five than anything else tonight.
We connected, though. It's good.
We totally did. What we're hearing here, ladies and gentlemen, is the Marine Corps March.
Semper Fidelis.
That's right. And the reason we're playing Semper Fidelis is not only because it was a smash hit jam of the late 19th century.
Which it totally was. But we're playing it because it was recorded at Edison Records.
As in Thomas Edison, the heralded inventor of the phonograph.
The movie camera.
The electrographic vote counter.
Yeah, crazy. The magnetic iron ore separator.
And of course,
the light bulb. And this is probably the understatement of the century, but Mr. Edison, he knew a thing or two about electricity.
He even helped invent, he actually did invent electric power distribution. And the reason we are going back in time right now is because the conflict today around solar power, in a way, it sort of already happened. And we're going to use some clips from the remarkable Rocky Mountain PBS program, Colorado Experience, to help tell this story. I think the whole episode was actually playing in the other room.
In the 1890s, America was electrifying, but we hadn't settled on a standard for electrification. And really, there were two rival electrical systems that were trying to become the major system.
Thomas Edison with his DC system versus George Westinghouse and his AC system.
So Edison, he wanted a system of small power plants spread all over the place, delivering DC electricity to nearby homes and businesses. It was a decentralized, distributed model for generation.
Whereas Westinghouse, he wanted large, centralized power plants, sending high voltage electricity across a spider web of power lines connecting the entire country.
And the battle between these two systems, it was actually decided right here. No, well, in Colorado.
Close, in Colorado.
Yeah.
Getting to the gold mines outside Telluride, Colorado was a nasty undertaking at this time.
It was rugged. The roads, where and if they even existed, were treacherous.
And probably the biggest challenge of all was supplying the mines with their enormous and incessant energy needs, hauling up coal and woods all the way up to the mines on tired little mule backs.
Yeah, that stinks. And this stumbling block, it was so major, it almost put the mines right out of business.
That is until this guy came along. L.L. Nunn, he convinced George Westinghouse, who we heard about earlier, he convinced George Westinghouse to install a hydropower generator at nearby Trout Lake and then run his alternating current lines all the way up to the mines. It was the first real test of AC power and the first commercial AC power plant, which you see right here down in Telluride. It was an outrageous and unexpected success, and word traveled fast.
So at that point, Edison, I think, was finally willing to recognize or acknowledge that the AC system was superior, and at that point, the AC-DC conflict is said to have concluded.
AC power was picked up all around the country, power plants connected by that spider web of power lines that today we call the electric grid. But that battle between Edison and Westinghouse, even to this day, we are deeply impacted by the result of that battle in ways we probably would have never guessed in the 1890s.
For example, this is more than half a century before the invention of the transistor. No? Okay, I'll tell you what it is. So it's that tiny little switch that makes every microchip, every computer work. And it actually needs DC power. It's not going to work without it. So all of our modern electronics, your cell phones, your computers, the only reason they work with our grid is because we've got tiny AC to DC adapters in our chargers.
That's why you have those big squares on your computer charger. So there are still some examples of DC power, but as totally the underdog, and really society has thought of that battle as being concluded between AC and DC, but it's really not. That battle is totally back.
It's back, and that's largely thanks to solar panels and other forms of distributed generation. So let's take a look at the price of rooftop solar over time. The different colors are just different sized rooftop systems. And over the past 15 years, prices have dropped 60%. As a result, the number of new systems that people are installing each year, it's going up and up and up, which means the total number of solar panels connected and working right now, it's basically gone
kaboom!
Like one of those rockets that John Mizia used to build.
Yeah, totally. It's exactly like a rocket, the growth of solar. To put it another way, this is what neighborhoods might have looked like a few decades ago, where you were a total dork
Nerd.
if you had solar panels. But in the not too distant future, might look like that.
Yeah, you're going to get hazed with that one. I've got one. You have one?
Of course I have one. Of course I have solar. Of course I do. And utilities, they're saying that this scenario, some utilities are saying this threatens that Westinghouse power system that we've built over the last 120 years, that we've built to be stable and reliable.
Yeah, solar panels on your roof, they're what some might call unreliable, right? What happens on a cloudy day. Plus, most of them actually generate DC electricity that has to be switched back to AC to get into your home and then onto the grid. And when it does, it moves up the power lines in the opposite direction as the big central power plant electricity.
This is a logistical
It's
headache
crazy.
for the utilities.
And as a result, they've been fighting it. They've been working the room with lawmakers. They've been trying to hold this distributed rooftop solar back in whatever way they can to make it too expensive for customers.
Still, viewing this all in context, solar power is still a very small piece of the pie. Less than 1/4% of U.S. power is generated by solar. Still, there are analysts who say that solar is very quickly, if not already, reaching that price point where it will be a major game changer, just like cell phones were or just like MP3s were.
I wake up every day and...
My bad.
And those same analysts have been suggesting that utilities shouldn't be fighting this change, but they should be embracing it. And some people, like the guy you just heard and we'll hear again, actually are. He's Kelsey Pagler Jr. He's the president of NRG Home Solar.
There we go.
I wake up every day and focus entirely on getting solar on homes across America.
So NRG is a power company, and they're operating all the way across the country from New Jersey to Wyoming.
That's right, and they're not exactly a utility, but they operate in much the same way. So they have big power plants that generate electricity that they sell to customers, but then they will also sell you a solar panel for your roof, or they'll lease you one.
A power company of choice.
They have to compete with other power operators, and a lot of other utilities don't. And that is one of the reasons that they say they need to stay ahead of the curve on this particular situation, distributed rooftop solar.
By the time you recognize that technologies are disrupting, it's too late.
So to figure out what this solar scuffle means for the future of our grid, Dan and I went out to a little place you might have heard of, the National Renewable Electricity Laboratory in Golden, Colorado, and we spoke with Doug Arendt.
A guy with a pretty long title.
Executive Director of the Joint Institute for Strategic Energy Analysis.
What that means, his job is basically to figure out how to make the energy future happen right now. And he spends his time thinking about
How will the system evolve into a smarter, more resilient, more affordable system?
And so his take on the disruption that's happening right now, thanks to solar panels and other forms of distributed generation, is that we will ultimately end up with a hodgepodge of electricity sources. So our grid isn't going to stay totally Westinghouse style, but it's not like it's going to flip over to Edison style overnight either. We're going to have a never-before-seen hybrid grid. I like to think of it as a Frankengrid.
Yeah.
It's one that
Takes advantage of the opportunities where there's distributed energy and the benefits that we've so valued over the last decades, if not a century, of the centralized system with transmission and distribution.
And as Arendt explained to us, channeling the benefits of both this Edison and Westinghouse power system means accepting some new concepts, like
what you'd call islandable mini-grids. So
Wait, what?
Islandable mini-grids, small areas.
Islandable mini-grids.
So
islandable microgrid. Mini-grids.
I had never heard of an islandable
This is our new
mini-grid
favorite word.
at that time. But so when we were talking earlier at the beginning of this entire program about how I said that the innovations that I thought were happening in Del Norte, Colorado, actually are happening in Colorado, you need look no further than Fort Carson Army Base, which is one of several Army bases around the country with their own solar-supported microgrids. So if the power goes out around Fort Carson, these solar panels actually will keep the power running.
So in the near future, we'll still have the major capital G grid, but microgrids like this one at Fort Carson, they're probably going to become a lot more common.
And also, I mean, we just look at the community of Boulder, for instance. I mean, they're trying to embark on creating their own entirely isolated grid and powering that 40% with renewables.
And remember those personal electronics, the ones that run off of DC power, the kind that we opted against in the 1890s? As I'm sure you know, that's a large and growing share of our energy use. So some people are actually proposing wiring up homes, businesses, buildings with DC grids inside the building.
Wow.
Some people are calling it Edison's revenge. He's back.
It's Edison, and Jordan was doing research on this and found several news articles that was the headline, Edison's revenge.
At least two.
And a couple of them use the same picture of Edison kind of frumpily.
The one that we
used earlier. Anyway, so this new system, it's Edison Westinghouse again, but it's not Edison versus Westinghouse anymore. Now it's Edison and Westinghouse.
Warm
It's
and fuzzy.
adorable.
Yeah, so, and we're journalists, we're not psychics. So we don't know exactly how the story will end up ultimately, but we're telling you what we do know.
So, and what we do know is that Colorado is at the center of a watershed moment for the future of energy and the next phase of energy in this country. And a lot of the innovations that you see, they might come out of this very building that we're standing in right now, the Powerhouse Energy Campus. And, we as energy journalists, we're lucky enough that we get to cover it, and we'll keep doing so. So, do I get to play Semper Fidelis again?
Yes!
Yes, I do.
All right.
That means we're actually done.
That's it. So,
Hey, thank you.